For today's lecture on Great Expectations, we're looking at Volume 2, Chapters 14, 15, and 16. Hopefully we're going to get through all that. There's not as much that happens now in sort of the middle of the book, but in this chapter 14, Estella has arrived and she tells Pip what is to be done. So on page 242, she says, oh, you must take my purse. We have no choice, you and I, but to obey our instructions. We are not free to follow our own devices, you and I. And she's making this admission that neither of them has their own will, that they're subject to the will of another, who is Miss Havisham. They go for lunch and visit, and Estella tells Pip that she's going to be staying in Richmond. She says, I'm going to live at a great expense with a lady there who has the power, or says she has, of taking me about and introducing me and showing people to me and showing me to people. Interesting, okay. She also tells, she's, kind of just talking about Mr. Matthew Pocket and so on, and she tells Pip that all the Pockets constantly send back reports that are, insinuating that Pip is doing all kinds of things and that, all these mean things that they're saying, but Miss Havisham doesn't really believe it. She just is amused by their jealousy and their rage and their torment. So Estella also talks about what it was like to grow up around these relatives. She says on 244, for you were not brought up in that strange house from a mere baby. I was. You had not your little wits sharpened by their intriguing against you, suppressed and defenseless under the mask of sympathy and pity and what not that is soft and soothing. They didn't like Estella, right? Because now all of a sudden Estella is going to have some claim to Miss Havisham's her possessions. And so they view as sort of competition. And then she says, you did not gradually open your round, childish eyes wider and wider to the discovery of that impostor of a woman who calculates her stores of peace of mind for when she wakes up in the night. Growing up with Miss Havisham was no picnic either. It would have been quite awful. So just another kind of reference to Pip and Estella as just, having to be subject to the will of Miss Havisham. Estella says, you are to take care that I have some tea and you are to take me to Richmond. Her reverting to this tone as if our association were forced upon us and we were mere puppets gave me pain. But everything in our intercourse did give me pain. Whatever her tone with me happened to be, I could put no trust in it and build no hope on it, and yet I went on against trust and against hope. Why repeat it 1,000 times? So it always was. She is not reciprocating the affection that Pip has for her, and yet he's persisting in this. And it's really not good. Okay, chapter 15. So he drops her off at the Richmond, and he goes back to the Pockets house. So I want to look at the beginning of chapter 15 because we're really starting to see some changes in Pip here. As I had grown accustomed to my expectations, I had insensibly begun to notice their effect upon myself and those around me. Their influence on my own character I disguised from my recognition as much as possible. But I knew very well that it was not all good. I lived in a state of chronic uneasiness respecting my behavior to Joe. My conscience was but not by any means comfortable about Biddy. When I woke up in the night, like Camilla, I used to think with a weariness on my spirits that I should have been happier and better if I had never seen Miss Havisham's face and had risen to manhood, content to be partners with Joe in the honest old forge. Many a time of an evening when I sat alone looking at the fire, I thought, after all, there was no fire like the forge fire and the kitchen fire at home. Pip is starting to think about, this negative moral impact that his expectations are having on him, that they're really compromising his morality. Not only that, they're also a bad influence on Herbert. And he loves Herbert, his friend. And he doesn't like to see that he is such a negative influence on Herbert. And, he's just, wishing that he didn't even get the great expectations and he would have never met Miss Havisham and that he could just be content with Joe. Do you ever find that in life that, sometimes when you're introduced to something that's you never even knew about, that all of a sudden you need to have it. You need to have it. You need to have it. You were content with your, I don't know, iPhone 6. And then they come with iPhone 7. And now you're not content with iPhone 6. You need iPhone 7. And I think that this is kind of what he's getting at, right? That he wishes that he could just have never known any of this. And he would have been happy. So during this chapter, we also find out that he is racking up all kinds of debts, and he doesn't even have a lot of money yet. He hasn't really received his inheritance, so he's just racking up debt. And so is Herbert, and Herbert certainly can't afford to pay it. And one of the things they do, too, is that they join this club called the Finches of the Grove, which is basically this kind of fraternity. It's one of those sort of clubs you join for status, but all they do is go and eat and get drunk, and it's just a complete waste of time. In addition, Bentley Drummle is in that club, and we're not fans of Bentley Drummle. So then he kind of talks about their life there and so on. But at the end of this chapter, so there's kind of a lot that goes on, but at the end of the chapter, he gets a note that Mrs. Joe Gargery has died. And the funeral's on Monday, so he's going to go to the funeral. So then in chapter 16, he does indeed go back to the funeral. Good for him. He says, this is really interesting on page 254. I'm really interested in this. He says, whatever my fortunes might have been, I could scarcely have recalled my sister with much tenderness. But I suppose there is a shock of regret, which may exist without much tenderness. So remember that his sister wasn't even nice to him. So it's hard for him to really feel a lot of affection for her. And it's not because, he's rich and doesn't care. It's because, it's just hard, right? But then he says, a little bit further down in the page, he says, it was fine summer weather again, and as I walked along, the times when I was a little helpless creature and my sister did not spare me vividly returned. So again, the abuse. But they returned with a gentle tone upon them that softened even the edge of tickler. For now the very breath of the beans and clover whispered to my heart that the day must come when it would be well for my memory that others walking in the sunshine should be softened as they thought of me. Do you remember when Joe would talk about his father, the alcoholic, abusive father, and how he could talk about him with empathy and kindly? And this is what we're seeing, a change in Pip, that he also is extending this same empathy and graciousness to his sister, especially when he thinks about how others will remember him, right? He's not the most upstanding character, and he thinks, I want, when they think of me, for their memories to be softened as well. So Pip actually stays the night in his old room with Joe and Biddy. He has a conversation with Biddy, and he's kind of hurt by her behavior. And then he says, I'm going to come down and visit often, and Biddy doesn't believe him, and he leaves really sad and feeling that, that's awful that she would think that, but yet it's probably true. And then when he's leaving, he's on his way back to London, and once again we have those rising mists. Once more the mists were rising as I walked away. If they disclosed to me, as I suspect they did, that I should not come back and that Biddy was quite right, all I can say is they were quite right too. And there's always this sort of ominous, something's going to happen with those mists. And so once again, the mists are here. He's heading back to London. What's going to happen?